Hello, DCC folks, and welcome to another episode of the Scrivenery. This is the show where we talk to third-party publishers or potential third-party publishers. Try to give you some tips on how to do third-party publishing for Goodman Games. I'm Ed Stanek. I am the leader of Reorgan Games, and we've been making some various products campaign world settings for DCC. This is my co-host, Trevor.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Trevor Stamper, and I'm in charge of Blind Visionary Publications. I publish Tales from the Smoking Worm and most recently Smoking Worm Monographs. And these are our guests today. We have Chris Doyle from Goodman Games.
Hey, everybody. Do you want me to do the full intro right now?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
All right. Hey, everybody. I am Chris Doyle. I am the director of product development for the 5E side of the house for Goodman Games. I am an old school gamer. I've been playing games for 40 plus years. Started off with D&D, Star Wars. I originally did freelance writing. Star Wars was my very first publication, the role-playing game, the old Die 6 version role-playing game from West End Games, and then they went out of business. I have this history of doing freelancing for people and then they go out of business. Joe's probably the one that's kind of bucked that trend because even TSR went out of business, so that's not a good thing. But anyway, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I have an unhealthy adoration for everything Jawa related and that front. And previously I joined Goodman Games about 1.5 years ago full-time. So yeah, I worked full-time in the tabletop role-playing game industry, which is kind of cool. And before that, for several decades, I was an aquatic biologist and a certified lake manager. So I spent a lot of time out in the field, on the water, and looking for critters and doing a lot of travel. So that's me. Hey, everybody.
All right. Levi, tell us about yourself.
I'm Levi Combs. I am the publisher and creative head at Planet X Games. We do zines, adventure modules, games, all kinds of groovy grindhouse stuff. We have titles to some of our books are Escape from Skullcano Island, Magic and Shit, The Phylactery. We just put out one called King Tut's Rootin' Tootin' Weird West Extravaganza, which is a mouthful. And we just put out our first DCC book. It's a hardback, 148 pages, called Jungle Tomb of the Mummy Bride.
Why don't you hold up your sample copy there so the folks can see it?
Oh,
Sure.
Do you have a copy?
Yeah, just got this in today, actually. So,
Awesome.
Nice.
This is Jeff Seifert and I did this with a host of friends and fellow conspirators.
Outstanding. So today's episode is something that perhaps isn't a thing that most people think of, but those of us who have been doing this have come to recognize that it's a necessary topic that you don't want to neglect, and that is team publishing. So unless you're solo and you're doing the entire thing by yourself, in which case you're kind of still doing the team roles, just all rolled into one. How to handle doing publishing as a group. Yeah, you can just jump right into it, which frankly is what I did, but I wish I'd have had some consideration of some things beforehand. So we're going to try to save you some of the pain that perhaps some of us have run into. And so the first thing that we want to look at with that, well, what do we mean by team publishing? Well, anytime you've got a group that's involved with your third-party deliverable, you're by definition going to be a team situation. And usually what's going on is, or one of the main benefits of that is you can have different roles that people will fill, because people come to any given project with different skill sets that they've got. You may have people who are particularly good at exposition and writing. Maybe you've got an artist with your group. You can have a project manager, which you may not think is something you really need to pay attention to, but trust me, if you neglect it, it will hurt you. And we'll dig into that a little bit more later. Publisher, and by that I mean someone who actually does the legwork to get copy, whether it's digital or physical material, out to where it's going to be sold. You'll have proofreaders, a layout editor, maybe a business manager, depending on the size of the operation that you're doing, and a road crew. And the reason I add that one on is because I feel like one of the best things that you can do for promotion of your product is running games, assuming that what you're producing is something that involves game execution, whether it's a supplement, an adventure, etc. Running games at your local game store or at a con is a great way to get some publicity going. So how do you come up with putting together a team? And so we're gonna talk with our group here and have each of us talk about, well, what our team consists of and how it came to be. Trevor.
Yeah, so my team at Blind Visionary is pretty small. There's kind of three core people who put together the idea. There's Brian Gilkison, John Olszewski, and myself. We're just three guys who like to game with each other on the weekends, and we were actually at GaryCon, and Brian and I were playing through somebody's module. I think it was Daniel Vance's, actually, Temple of the Hamster, and Brian looked at me and said, "Hey, we should publish something." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm all for that, right? I've been writing things for years." And so we've got that core team that's ends up being my developmental team most of the time. And then my daughter, Caitlin Stamper, is a professional book designer. She works for HarperCollins.
Nice.
And everything. And so she went to college to do design, and which was actually my original intent, and I ended up in biology as well instead. But yeah, so I've got a full-time designer who works with me, Caitlin. She's deep into not only layout design and everything, but also art design and art management. So she works as my art manager when I don't have time to deal with that. We make decisions together and everything, and determine what artists we're going to work with for a given project. Which brings me to artists. I've got about 6 or 7 that I work with on a routine basis, including some of them. The longest I've known one of my artists is we went to high school together. As a matter of fact, my buddy Joel Phillips and I started. He's the one that introduced me to D&D. So at about 15, and so he went to the Kubert School for Comic Book Artists. So he's a well tried and true
Nice.
illustrator. And when we started launching into this, I told him about it, and he was like, "Oh, I think I could do some." And he brought a couple of Kubert illustrators along as well, and everything. So we have that kind of crew. I've brought on a couple of freelance writers, not many. Because we do most of the writing. As a matter of fact, I think I probably do about 60 to 70% of it myself. And then I actually work mainly as, kind of the publisher. I deal with different companies and getting things printed and getting them shipped and all that stuff. And then we also have I brought on a copy editor and Catherine Kirk, who works, I think it's Gecko Editing. And then we have a content editing team as well. Kate Bullock and Camden Wright over at, I think it's Unicorn Motorcycle Games. They do content editing for me and find specialists if I need people to consult on given articles and everything. Like, for instance, we were just about to print issue 4 of The Smoking Worm, and it has an article on familiars and talks about Jinn familiars. So really minor Jinn. We consulted with someone on that. Who's Arabic and actually has quite a bit of knowledge on pre-Islamic Jinn kind of backgrounds and stuff. So from there, most of us, the core kind of work the core group also work as our road crew. And so we've been to Gen Con and GaryCon and Gamehole Con and stuff, and run several games that are associated with this. Since I don't really do modules to this point, that's actually kind of hard to do. But we've got a couple things in the works. So yeah. How about you, Levi?
Well, I started off as
your team.
Oh, I actually started off really as kind of a not so much a one-man operation, but I was doing the bulk of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing all the writing, all the project management. I was tracking down all the leads, and then I had a couple of really talented artists that I'm still working with to this day. You know, with those guys are a big part of why our products look the way they do. Guys like Adrian Landeros, he's a fantastic artist. He does our covers, almost all of our covers, really. And then tons of interiors. Ed Bickford, who a lot of folks are starting to catch on to. He's a great illustrator. He comes from comics. Dan Smith, Chris Carmen, just a ton of guys that we've had kind of come through, and they've kind of defined the way that our books look, and that's good. You know, I'm big fans of those guys, regardless. You know, no matter what project they work on. But when you put everything together, it really does kind of shape and mold the way our books look. And the other big part of our team is Tracy Steele, who does all the graphic design, our logos. She does all the layout. I mean, that stuff is so important, because you can have all the best art in the world and you can have all the best writing or whatever content, but if it looks like shit, nobody wants to read it. You know, how many times you picked up something and it's just a little askew and you're like, nah, it's kind of off. And I've worked with a couple different editors, both content editors and just, folks who just make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And then a lot of play testers. I like to run games at cons, as many as I can get in. I'll do like one a day, but then I'll do like 2 off the books, just kind of going for that. If you know where to find us, and you can get in on the game. That way, people who can't get into a game, when it fills up fast, there's time off the books. You can come and play. Because everybody should have a chance. And then I've got just a small circle of friends and colleagues and people that I used to game with, and I go, this seems cool to me, but can you look at this? Is this as cool to you as it kind of seems to me? And those guys are a super big help. So yeah, that's kind of how the breakdown is for me.
All right, Chris.
So this might seem weird. It might seem like I'm from the big corporate America company, but really not. I mean, until about a year and a half ago, Goodman Games was publisher Joe Goodman, and then it was all freelancers. I mean, it was freelancers were spread all over the North America, really. That's kind of how we did our thing, and it was all literally, we all had other jobs and did other things. Now we're slowly kind of moving in a different direction, where we're kind of coming on board full time. So I joined Goodman Games back in August of 2020, right in the middle of a pandemic. So that was a lot of fun. So that was a kind of a different role. And then Mike joined us on the DCC side. I'm sure everybody on this call knows Mike Curtis, Mr. DCC. So he joined that, and largely I think the main reason why Joe tapped me, in addition to the 40 years of experience in playing games and 30 years of writing as a freelancer, was my project management skills. My previous job, I managed $1 million projects where there were teams of people, scientists and other computer specialists that worked on things, and it was all primarily what I'd done the last probably 5 years was focused just on these large, huge projects that had lots of moving pieces, all over the tri-state area in northeastern United States. So there was a lot of travel involved in everything. So and there was many parts of those projects as well. There was reporting, there was field work, there were meetings, there were public meetings, there was going in front of a camera and talking to the press, and all these different things that when you're in school, studying for biology, they don't tell you about, and then you end up doing it. So I really kind of owned my project management skills through that, and fortunately the company I worked for, they actually provided a lot of project management training, and then I brought that with me to the tabletop role-playing industry. So at Goodman Games, we still use predominantly freelancers, so freelance writers, artists. We do have a graphic designer who's pretty much our art director. The artists we have, I think it's at least a dozen artists. You guys probably know all the names, Doug Kovacs and Stefan Pogue and all the regulars in that. And we're kind of branching off into doing a little bit more of a 5e kind of a side of the house and a DCC side of the house now. So I manage all the 5e side. Mike manages all the teams for the DCC side. And then it's just a matter of, here's the projects coming up, and then tapping, the folks that you have. And again, most of them are freelancers. I inherited 2 editors and 3 writers, 3 5e writers, and we had 2 5e editors. So one of the first things we wanted to do when I came on board was we wanted a bigger team. We wanted that flexibility, because one of our 5e writers was, you guys know him well too, Bob Brinkman. He does a lot of DCC stuff as well. So he was really kind of burning the candle at both ends. I can't imagine Bob burning the candle at both ends. If you guys know him, it's all he does. His candle's always on fire on both and on fire too. So that was the first thing. So what we did was we did an open call last year. Actually, it was like a year ago, January. We did an open call. All we did was we put one web blog post on our website, and blasted it out on social media. And in like 3 weeks, I think we had that open. We had over 100 people send submissions into us, and then we went through. I actually designed a scoring rubric for them, and we wanted, at the end of the day, I wanted 3 to 4 core writers, but we wanted more. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about how big you want your team to be. So I kind of wanted to home in on 8 to 10, but then once we got through the whole process and we scored everybody, we actually ended up with 13 writers and then 2 extra editors that we quote unquote mined out of that open call. And that was valuable to all of a sudden have this influx of talent and amazing diverse people from all over the world. We had a guy from Serbia, we had a guy from Australia, one from Ireland, one from England, a couple from Canada. And it was great. It was just great to get all these different folks from different walks of life, and they all have a different voice. And that's important. That's very important to have that different voice when you're trying to do, different projects and everything. And kind of when you're assembling your team. So that's kind of how I built the 5e side of the house. I'm using most of those 13 writers for several different projects moving forward. But I think an important thing to keep in mind, and I'm sure you guys all know this too, is you always keep that eye out for more talent, because you just never know when you're going to need more talent, or somebody brings something else to the table that you're not aware of. Especially artists, you get that certain look from a particular artist where you're just like, that fits what we're doing. DCC's got a very specific art where if you take some regular old fantasy artist and say, here, do a cover for a DCC book, might not work out, unless their theme is kind of that. So yeah, that's how we kind of developed the 5e side of the table. The DCC side of the table is doing something a little bit different. Obviously, since DCC's been around now for 10 years, there's a lot of folks that have already been involved. So there was a healthier fan base, more active fan base directly with Goodman Games, and a lot of folks already doing zines and third-party publishers that have kind of transitioned and have done some products for Goodman Games. And then same with the artists as well. They've kind of carried over as well. So 2 very different ways on how we arrived at our teams, but we still got to that point where we have multiple people to kind of oversee for a project.
Right. Yeah. So my team is it's pretty small, really. It's basically my wife and I, and we do the writing. We on our initial book, we also had my daughter helped us out. She wrote maybe about 20% for us. We had one book where we farmed out a good the bulk of the writing to a freelance writer, and we've always my wife has done a couple of our illustrations for us, but for the most part, we've contracted various artists. And I handle the project management stuff, the publishing. We both do proofreading, and I do all the layout, editing, typesetting stuff. And we've both run our stuff at cons, as we are our road crew. And there's also been a couple of the pieces that we've done where we've written a project or 2 solo, but for the most part, it's a pretty collaborative process. And we we started off, we were transitioning our local game group. They were brand new RPGers, and we'd come off of a Pathfinder game, which was in retrospect a real mistake to have brand new RPGers playing Pathfinder. And so we said, hey, we've got this other game we want to introduce you to. It's DCC. And in doing that, we thought, well, we wanted to have a setting to do it in. And so we decided to put together our own setting. And somewhere in the midst of that, we decided, hey, why don't we try publishing this and see what comes of that? So it was just kind of that organic process of turning into a third-party publishing unit. All right, so
yeah, so I think what's nice about the team, our guests and everything, is we have a whole range of experiences here, right? From a two-man team up to kind of Levi and myself probably have a dozen people that we tap on a regular basis to help out, to Chris who has a larger network. But I mean, I also think it's telling that Goodman Games, I mean, Chris, what you're telling us is just 3 or 4 years ago, Goodman Games was essentially not much bigger in terms of employees and everything than Levi and myself, right? I mean,
very true.
One full-time person with a whole bunch of people to help out, at different levels and degrees and stuff. So
yeah, so and most people did not realize that. They come, even a couple years ago before the pandemic hit, you came and you saw the booth at Gen Con and you were like, oh, where's your guys' headquarters at? Believe it or not, the open call, when we sent out the open call, one of the more common questions I got was, am I going to need to relocate to like where your headquarters are? And I'm like, no. It's like, because we don't have headquarters. We all work remotely and we've made that work. And quite frankly, when the pandemic hit, we obviously didn't miss a stride on that because we'd already been doing that to an extent. So we just kept, plugging right along in that, where the rest of corporate America was trying to figure out, how do we do Zoom meetings and everything? So
yeah. So all of us have different takes on I think what is a really important aspect of what we're dealing with when we deal with teams is, how do you divide and conquer, right? So what does it mean to divide and conquer, really? Let's start with that. I mean, for each of you, do you guys, when you've got a project, how do you break it up? Do you come to a team consensus, or do you have, is it kind of like a friendly democracy, or is it a monarchy that may or may not be friendly on a given day, right? I mean, how do you guys run your shops? Why don't we start with Levi? How about you?
Okay. I prefer to gather people together who each one of them are good at one or two things specifically. Mm-hmm. Like I want people who are specialists, really. And I get those people together, and then kind of my job as a project manager is to make sure that everybody gels and everything is matching the aesthetic and the vibe of the trade dress and how everything should look, feel, and play in the modules or the books or the zines. We just want to make sure that everything meshes and kind of comes together, and it ends up in its best possible final form. But having said that, you have to, I kind of have that eat what you kill mindset, if you're coming to the table, let's come to, don't come with something half-assed. let's get in there and get it done and make it the very best it can be. Because when you're doing these Kickstarters and people are giving you their hard-earned money, you want to give them your best. You don't want to just, half-ass it. And can we what's the language like on these Twitch channels? It's all good. Okay. I don't want to be that guy. Yeah, we just people are giving you their hard-earned money, so you don't want to end up with giving them some sort of product that that you don't really believe in. You're just doing it just to make money, because people can smell genuineness, and they know if your product is genuine. If you're just throwing it out there just to push something out, people can tell. I know I can. So you want to make sure that you give them your very best. So in all that, I think that you have to choose the right people for the right jobs. And if those people are, if everybody is good, if you have one person who's really good at layout, you have your artists who are really good at the vibe you're looking to put off, and you've got your writers who are each good at their own. Like maybe one guy's good at rules, and another guy's really good at the lore and the room descriptions, or putting everything together. You bring all those people together, and then the project manager, it's his job to to make sure all the moving pieces are working, and there's no dirt in the cogs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, though, when you've got a couple of different writers who are batting things back and forth, Levi, are they batting them through you? Are they sending you Word documents or Google Docs, and then you're doing an edit run and then sending it back to the next guy? And how are you passing that around? How are you managing that team? And when you tell them,
I work
hey,
through
I'm
Google
not happy with
Docs.
this, how's that work?
No, Google Docs for sure is great, because that keeps everybody up to date, and everybody can see things as they're progressing. But at the end of the day, I have the creative control. I want to make sure that what's coming across the table is going to be the kind of stuff that we're wanting to publish. And with the Planet X stuff, there is a certain vibe there. There is a certain cinematic, fantastic, weird fantasy vibe. I'm not interested so much in publishing stuff that's very Tolkien-ish, or is kind of your normal sort of fantasy stuff. I'm more interested in the stranger aspects of fantasy, and but again, that comes down to hiring the right people. And when you make your decision to bring somebody on board, or you're wanting to get a certain module concept of across, you have to hire the right people. You have to know when to delegate. I might not be good at something, so delegate it over to somebody maybe who is, and then stand by your decisions, be a strong leader, and make sure everybody it all comes together and stays together and keeps going.
So one more question for you before we hand it over to
Sure.
either Ed or Chris. So you've talked a lot about writers and building kind of teams and everything and stuff like this, and specialties within writing, right? Somebody who's crunchy, somebody who's a little fluffy, right? Who so those kind of balance each other out. Where does art play? Do you see art coming in at the beginning? Do you see it at the middle? Do you feel it at the end? Based on how that product is shaping up, where does art sit within that mix for you as a project manager?
I have artists involved almost from the get-go. I have an idea of when we sit down and we say, all right, we're going to publish this module. What are the broad strokes? I have those ideas. Like I definitely want a full page of this. I want a half page of this. We've got some magic on it, but this one is really cool. So I want to make sure that we get an illustration of that. There's a really cool Battle of the Temple, but I want it to be of this at this angle, and then you have to, you choose the right artist. And then I've got such trust with my artists, the guys that I've worked with, since the very first products that I ever put out, that most of the time I can step back and say, hey, listen, this is the idea. This is kind of what it looks like. Give them a couple sentences, really, and say, all I want you to do is read this, look at this, and make it cool. And and I find, honestly, that I get the best results from giving the artists that I trust, that I've worked with quite a bit. I get the best results from them by giving them that, not supposed to giving them that freedom, but saying, hey, I trust you, go do your thing. And man, I would say 19 times out of 20, they come back with gold. They come back with, here's the broad strokes. And you can give Adrian Landeros, hey, here's what I want to see. And you detail it all out, or you can just say, hey man, there's an ancient temple, there's a mummy queen, and there's some zombies and there's some adventurers, make it look cool. And he comes back with these this awesome full color cover that just sells the whole product.
Right.
So if you have that sort of trust with with your artist and with your collaborators, it usually comes across pretty good.
Okay, that's really interesting. Ed, how about you? In terms of writing, in terms of art, how do you mix that up? How do you blend it together? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you and your wife kind of take turns as project managers, or
Oh
are
no,
you...
no.
No. Oh, okay. So tell us.
So I'm a very left brain person. She's a very right brain person, and so the project management and some of the more boxy kind of aspects, the planning and so forth, that all had to fall to me by default. And because it's something that I think I'm really good at, and it's something that she will admit herself she is not. Likewise, I can't even draw a halfway decent stick figure. So any kind of illustration work that was going to be done in house was absolutely going to be her, and she does some really nice drawing. Now, in terms of, we both do writing, and we have slightly different styles, but when we're going on a project, they come together pretty closely and fairly well. I've handled the publishing stuff. The layout editing I've done in large measure just because you're doing that in a particular software package, and she's not a very computer savvy technical person, and so again, that fell to me. We both have run stuff, our materials at cons, because we've both been GMing for ages and ages, and if I had to come down to it, I'd say she's probably a little bit of a better GM than I am. She's an amazing storyteller. The extent to which we have division of labor has largely been because we are very different people, and it has been intuitively obvious to both of us who's better at a given thing. And so when we have applied that to the publishing process, there are certainly certain things that is just automatically falls to one of us based on our skill set. We do, that's not to say it's not collaborative. We do, especially the first book we was our first foray into it. We did a lot of talking about the concepts behind it and how we wanted to proceed, and and we wanted to come to a point that we were both comfortable with. In the end, I've been kind of the driving force on the project, and so when it comes down to it, if a decision has to be made, I've made the decision. I've been the where the buck stops. But fortunately, the vast majority of time we see very much eye to eye after we hash things through and discuss it, and how should we plan, how should we present this, and how do we want to handle this part of it. And after we talk it through, we generally come to an agreement regardless. So most of our division of labor, like I said, has just been it was pretty clear to both of us where things needed to fall based on our skill sets.
I see. So that's nice. I mean, that's a nice little, nucleic kind of family working together.
Yeah, we complement each other very, very much so in our skill sets.
That is truly awesome. Yeah. I guess I'm a little more like Levi. I tend to pull people together. Now, most of the time we've been focused, like Levi produces Phylactery, which is essentially kind of a, like a Dragon-esque type of magazine or fanzine that has multiple different segments in it and everything. And Tales from the Smoking Worm is very much like that. It's meant to look and feel kind of like zines out of the 70s, but with DCC content, right? So a little more modern. But so with that, there's kind of a, catch as catch can, right? So it depends on who's writing and how big their articles are and what that word count looks like as to who gets into a specific issue, because we've set a hard limit. Initially, we set a hard limit of 48 pages, and I found that it was impossible for me to actually keep it small enough to put it in 48 pages. And so we did finally settle on a hard limit of 60 pages. And every once in a while I creep to 64, but 60 to 64 is where we try to sit. And with that, what I find is I have a different team on any given issue in terms of writers, but the developmental team doesn't change. The developmental team also, as well as my daughter, Caitlin, who's the lead designer, they all sit kind of as an advisory board if I'm making decisions on what what project's going to go forward to Kickstarter, who we're going to focus on getting art from for a given project, right, and things like this. I kind of like to clear the air about once a month or so with my team and just say, hey, this is where I'm at and what I'm thinking. Does anybody have any feedback on that? And so I do listen to all of that, but in the end of the day, I have to make a decision on what's going to go forward and how things are going to get paid and who we're going to publish with and, what kind of cool things I'm going to come up with and stuff like that. And the focus of a given issue. In terms of art, I like to bring artists on early, but I find that writing this kind of periodical doesn't allow for that in a great way, right? And because we've got a whole bunch, I probably have 30 or 40 different articles being written in a given moment, maybe more. And then I myself try to write about an additional 2,000 to 3,000 words a week on top of that on other projects, this kind of other stuff that Blind Visionary is working on that hasn't come out yet. And so, we take everything through to a manuscript form. And what we like to do is we like to send off finished layout pages, which I believe is kind of how Goodman functions too, right? Ultimately, you send an artist, here's what the layout looks like, fit everything around this. And if you got a block of text, it could shift down or it could shift up, but it needs to sit somewhere in there and you need to be able to know that that's going to be, 5 inches by 3 inches or whatever. And so I work closely with artists in a conceptual form that's very nebulous as we're writing manuscripts, and we usually tag one artist per manuscript, right? So I know that Joel Phillips is going to do this one, and I know that I'm going to have, say, Jay Tanaka do another one, and maybe I'm going to have Brian Makish, who's another Kubert School graduate, do this one, and I'll be talking to them, and they'll be kind of putting out loose concepts, quick digital sketches, and then when we get it to manuscript, we'll send them the manuscript pages, formalize it, and everything, and then I track everything with work orders. So I have an Excel spreadsheet that says, here are the work orders, here are the products that are being produced off those work orders and everything and stuff. And that's the only way I can keep track of it. And then I keep track of individual issues by issue, right? So I have a file and it says, this is what's going to go in that issue. And then I'll, every couple of weeks, I'll scooch those around depending on word count. So one of the things Levi, we write smaller products, right? Smaller kind of 5.5 by 8.5, 6 by 9 size zine things. I don't know how you work it out, but an average issue of Smoking Worm for me sits at about 14,000 words. 14,000 to 15,000 is a good word count. It gives me plenty of room for layout and plenty of room to deal with art and everything without feeling scrunched. The first issue had 19,000, and it was like pulling your hair out trying to get everything in there. Literally, we're down to a 1/16 of an inch margin on bleed or cut values and stuff, and that gets really hair raising. So yeah, so that's kind of how I operate. I don't know if I got both my questions in there. Writers and artists, I bring them together, but in different ways. And the other thing that I found is really useful, we have a secret Facebook group. I think I've mentioned this before, Ed. I think I've talked about it in the past, but we have a Facebook group. Most of my dedicated collaborators are on the Facebook group or on Facebook, where we're on Facebook. So we made a secret Facebook group so we could talk. And so artists will post art as they're working, which I find often drives other artists to do art faster and to work together. And then we'll post manuscript drafts of things and everything. One of the things that I let some of my Kickstarter supporters do is we have a tier that allows them to jump on to the secret Facebook group for one issue, basically one issue. Like, they'll back at issue 3, and by the time issue 3 is done, they'll, that'll be 3 or 4 months or whatever. They'll get to see everything and comment and get in there and talk to the writers, the artists, everything as it's going. And then we'll cycle them off if they don't back it at that level again. And some do and some don't. They come and go. But that's really nice too, because we get this independent kind of dedicated support. I mean, you have to be really interested in what we're doing behind the scenes to really want to pay to sit behind the scenes and see what's going on. So, but I find that those people they're a huge source of fresh inspiration. And often I'll have an idea and I'll be like, well, I'm going to go down this pathway. What do people think? And they'll be like, no, it's no, that's not a good idea, Trevor. And, but on top of that, sometimes we post pieces of manuscript and they will build off of it and everything. So that's, they'll throw ideas out there and those will become real things. So I try and get that input when I can, but on a limited scope. I can't make it, the reason it's secret is because I don't want to have 100,000 people trying to tell me yes, no, here.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. So we get there's like maybe 5 or 6 people at a time who were there as kind of fans and everything. So that's how I'm organized and stuff. Chris, I mean, you organize at a different scale now. So tell us, what is that like when we get to that scale? Because that's something I think Levi and I are both really interested in, probably Ed too. And one day that'd be a dream job, right?
Yeah, it's got its own advantages and disadvantages. First, I'll just want to piggyback on what actually all three of you said. One of the things that I look to do when putting the teams together is you want to put people in positions to succeed. Okay, you want to set people up, and make sure that they have the resources they need to get the job done, and that they're comfortable with it and they're really good at it. Now, that being said, okay, you do want to occasionally get people out of their comfort zone, because that's how people grow. And that's how sometimes you find out that, wait, this person who used to just be good for a 5,000 word, article over here, he can do his own book at this point. Sometimes you don't learn that until you actually try it. And sometimes, I was never a big fan of just throwing people into the deep end and be like, well, sink or swim, it's going to work, because, the project might sink or swim on that. But if you get people ready, and if you kind of get them gradually used to different responsibilities, at some point you do need to kind of cut them loose and see if you can have some success with that. So I'm a big proponent of that. Now, as far as where does the buck stop, it's me. I mean, technically it's Joe as the publisher. I mean, he will often come in and be like, nope, we're doing this, or no, we're releasing this month. But if I've got a project with 5 or 6 writers on it, and one of them fails, it's on me. It's not on the writer. I picked the writer. It's like technically I'm the one, and I have to pick up the slack on what that is. And I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I'm a game master. I'm a control freak. I'm good with that. There's a lot of people in the world that aren't. But so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how the project gets across the finish line, but it's my responsibility to get it across the finish line. So that's how I work with that. Now, yes, some of the projects I've kind of made a little bit of a habit of being known for the big, huge books, going back to Castle White Rock, which was my biggest, at 768 pages, I think that was, and all different types of things. And then, Tome of Horrors, but Tome of Horrors comes, not Tome of Horrors, excuse me, Temple of Elemental Evil comes along, and that was only 732 pages. So, it was a lot easier to handle that, because that was a piece of cake. It's like at that, I was like, oh, we can do this. But it turns into breaking it down into smaller pieces that you can handle. So when you look at Temple of Elemental Evil, I kind of just looked at it as like, okay, it's 20 small modules is what it is, and then I signed them out. I signed pieces out to people to handle that. And sure enough, we had a team of writers on it, converters, basically conversion people. And some of them didn't work out, quite frankly, for a variety of reasons. But then you pick up the slack and other ones step in, and some of the other writers like, okay, I'll take this chapter. Okay, I'll do this chapter. Okay, who's doing the magic items? Okay, who's doing this? And so, you having a team where you can have people pick up the slack, because in my opinion, when the more we talked about it, the more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more issues you're going to have. It's the same thing. The larger your team is, they're not all going to be A players. You're going to have a couple that are going to stumble and maybe even fall flat on their face. But if your team is good enough and big enough, you can overcome that. You can overcome that and sometimes not miss a beat, and sometimes learn a lot about your team about that. It's useful information that when you go down this route again, well, maybe you don't want, X, Y, and Z on the team, but maybe, A, B, and C, they did great, and maybe they're ready for, something bigger. So you're always looking for that. As far as artists go, we get artists involved generally after the drafts are written. And generally we have the actual writers are the ones that are going to actually dictate to the artists what we want the pieces to be. Now, we don't want them to, I think Levi said it very eloquently, you don't want to give the artist too much information. We had that problem early on where we were giving them way too much information. And the artists don't like that. And we've gone to a system almost exactly as Levi described, a few keywords and a couple of sentences. And then, you know, the unspoken rule is make it cool, you know. And then, you know, generally we'll get sketches back and we'll, you know, before the final is turned in, we'll be like, yep, you're on the right track there. Or, oh no, you're not on the right track. Some of the Tome of Horrors handouts that we do, those have to be exact because they're exactly what the PC see when they open up the door, or when you get that handout, it has to be exactly this way. So sometimes the artists will try and go a certain direction and we're like, no, you know, there has to be 4 pillars in the room because 3 of them are trapped. You know, it's like you can't put 6 in there because you feel like it, you know. It's like, so it does vary on that, but in general the regular interior artwork, you know, we just give them the bare minimum that they need and then they're off and running in that. But generally that is after the draft is written, because we want the draft to be written and then we want that to spur what those scenes are, and we want those to be the good scenes. And you know, we don't even want the writers to say, oh, this should be a half-page piece or this should be a whole page. We actually leave that up to the artist also, to let them kind of run with things, and our art director as well. He kind of works closely with them in that regard. So did I answer all your questions? I think I did.
You did. And so my question is I mean, you've articulated a really interesting kind of back and forth. So let me just kind of capture it, and then I've got a follow-up question if I've captured it right. What it sounds like to me is as project manager, you're usually starting with a pool of writers. You're giving them assignments. Hey, I need you to write, you know, dungeon level 3, and you need to write dungeon level 4, and exactly. you're you know, really, you need to get the gatehouse right and everything. So they have their own individual assignments. They come back with those pieces. Maybe they stumble, maybe they don't. But in the end of the day, you've got a manuscript, which then goes through editing. And then did I understand you correctly? Did you then say that the next thing you do is go back to your writers and have them conceptualize what pieces of art they think would be cool? You know,
Yes.
Do they have a layout at that point? Do they see that layout before they move forward?
No, generally not. No, they basically usually right when after they finish their draft, then we ask for the art orders basically, and it's based purely on the amount of words that the particular project is. So you know, I mean, they might need to do 5 pieces, they might need to do 20 pieces or whatever, but that is generally comes after, and then that goes into so it goes into editorial, and then it goes into layout. And meanwhile, while it's in layout, the art's going, so the art director is already kind of laying it out and figuring out where the art's going to go. But again, it's all fluid, and I'm sure you guys know this, because like you were saying with your oh yeah, we started at this word count, but then we got to that word count, and you know, 60 pages wasn't sometimes enough. So a lot of times we go in with a target, like, you know, we want a 16-page module. Sometimes it doesn't end up to be a 16-page module because of there happened to be a couple of handouts that needed to be half-page, you know, things you don't think about when you first conceptualize this is a 16-page book. And then when the writer comes back, you know, and you look at everything, I always look at things from the perspective of, you know, usability at the table, and if there's a couple of handouts that will make the experience better, well, I want to include those. And if that's going to push us to 18 pages, you know, obviously Boss Man needs to check off on it. But you know, that I think that process needs to be better. It needs to be more open of no, I think we can do it better by adding this part, or I think we can do it better by adding this section. Case in point, an example. So with the Or line of books, with the 5e conversions from the additional first edition books, we were like, it would be cool if we could add new additional material. And a lot of times when you read those modules, it's very obvious where places it can be expanded. You know, you try not to be ham-fisted about it. In B1, there was a tower that sat above the dungeon, and it was never designed. And it was like, that's a no-brainer. It's like, let's map that out and let's design that and let's add that as new material. And it's like, so that just comes naturally. So we're usually pretty open about that. Like, you know, we'll come into a project and it'll be like, it's got to be this amount and this is what we're looking for. But if we're blown away by something, we will pivot and we will look to make it, if it's going to make the game experience better, is probably the end of the game.
Okay. I mean, you know, so that's kind of my focus too, as project manager, is I look at the pieces and I think, how can this be best
Better.
used at the
Yes.
table by a player, by the table by a judge, at the
Mhm.
table by whomever, right?
Yep.
How is this product best serving the
Yeah,
client?
and I'll jump in one more on that. And this is something that I learned over time is especially when you're talking specifically adventure modules, maybe 10% of them get played at the table. So reading it needs to be very important, because I mean, I have boxes and boxes of adventures that I buy just because I love adventures, but I never run them. But I want to sit down and enjoy reading them. And that was one of the things that like 4th edition did not do good. 4th edition, you couldn't sit down and read those things. Now, they were easy to run at the table the way the format was. And if people remember 4th edition, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Every encounter was on a 2-page open spread, you know, but you couldn't read that thing to save your life. Like you couldn't read it and kind of figure out what the story was, because it was very disjointed, the way they set those up. So I've come to learn that usability at the table is the first thing, but second thing, you also want it to be just a good read and an interesting read, because the fact of the matter is most of these will not be played by every person that purchases them. I mean, you know, we like to think they are, but at the end of the day, they're not. And that 10%, I don't know if that 10% is accurate. Maybe it's 25%. You know, it's probably not 50% in my opinion. So it's probably somewhere between 20 and 50%, maybe as low as 10%. All I know is I have hundreds and hundreds of modules and I've not played many of them.
So I'm not the only one who does this.
Yeah.
Wow.
As you were saying
Pulling
that,
back
Chris,
the
I'm
curtain.
thinking, I have 7.5 linear feet of Goodman Games products right now, and I've only played maybe 7 or 8 of those modules.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's not that the rest are bad. It's just that's, you know, there's only a certain amount of time allotment,
Mhm.
and my group likes to jump back and forth between a published module
Yeah.
and going our own way, and so there's a lot of back and forth and everything, and while I own a complete set of DCC modules that the official run, not every one of those is to a given group's liking, right? I mean, so some of
Yeah.
those I might run for
Mhm.
one group, but not another. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do have one follow-up question. You mentioned you have essentially an art manager, right?
Mhm.
Is that the layout and design manager? Are they in charge of layout and
Yes.
working with artists?
Yep.
So
Yep. He is.
you kind of harangue and pull together all the writers, get the manuscript in place,
Yep.
get the writers to write what they think would be a cool synopsis. I think
Yep.
this would be a great illustration. This would be a great illustration, would highlight my work well. And then you hand that over to
Art director.
an art director who
Mhm.
basically then does the art director ever go back to the writer, or do they only work with artists at that point?
Usually just the artist and then back to me typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, typically. And again, when you're dealing with freelancers, they do their assignment, they get it done, they turn it in, they're off to their next assignment. Most of my writers are also freelancing for other companies. So that's another thing. I mean, people always all the time, they're like, oh wow, it's like Temple of Elemental Evil. You must be so excited about that. I'm kind of like, you know, I haven't touched it in 2 years. Like, you know, it's like there's so many stages of it after you turn it over. Because I was a freelancer when I did that one, and it's like, and I'm like, to be honest with you, it's been a while since I'm 4 projects away from that one now, and I'm like, it's kind of like with TV shows where they're already filming the next season when you're seeing that season, and they're like, oh, we're already like, oh really, what happened back then? You know, you've already moved on, and most people don't get that too. A lot of times you're like, oh, that was like 2 years ago I did that. So
I'm just beginning to experience that with Smoking Worm. We'll be putting out, like, we're issue 4 literally just went to press right now. So I got the email back from the printer today, and they're working on it and everything and stuff. And I looked at it the other day and I was like, wow, I was like, you almost forget, even though I'm working on it on a regular basis, talking about it on a regular basis, I'm not looking at it on a regular basis. And I'm already, working on issues 6, 7, and 9.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
and
that's the nature of the beast.
And that's where my brain is most of the time, is where
Yep.
where am I going to be in 5 months?
Yep.
And everything. So going back and looking at it, sometimes I'm like, wow, it was way smaller than I thought it was. It's always it's a new feeling for me. Well, cool. So that's how we kind of divide and conquer. What else is there, Ed? What else do we need to worry about when we're dealing with this kind of team-based management style?
Yeah, so this this next nugget is one that I think is probably one that gets neglected most, because people don't understand the impact of it. And when it's not there, they might recognize that things are going poorly, but not recognize that this is why. And I've seen this too in my professional experience. We had a dedicated project manager on some of the larger IT projects that we were working on. And when she got moved to a different department, and they said to me, "Hey, Ed, you're good at that stuff. Why don't you handle that project management stuff in addition to your technical stuff?" Because in everybody's mind, it's not something that takes a lot of work, because there's really nothing to it. And that very quickly went south, because it really is something that involves a lot of work and effort. And if you don't put the effort into it, it does absolutely impact your project. And so what does this mean? Well, just to give an example. So when we started into our first book, okay, it's a campaign war guide. Okay, so therefore there's going to be an atlas section. Well, that's going to be broken down into X number of different kingdoms. There's going to be a section about creatures. There's going to be a section on classes, patrons, etc. All right, well, who's going to do what? Okay, well, talking about, I think I'd like to do this country and this country. Well, so at the simplest, most basic level, it's distributing and assigning those tasks. But it's also then a recognition that that in a lot of cases these things are intertwined, and so therefore, before I can have this person working on this piece, this other person has to be done with this piece. And so you're setting up some timeframes and expectations. This is especially, I think, important. And I don't know about about you all guys. This is not my full-time gig. I make very little money off of this process. I'm a chemist by day. My wife is a preschool teacher. So we're doing this in our spare time. And so if we don't set some time frames and some expectations of this is going to be done by a certain point, and this is going to be done by this person, things aren't going to be happening in a timely manner. And so project management involves keeping track of who's doing what, when they're what is the nature of what they're supposed to be producing. So for example, if it's a writing section, how many words is that supposed to be? What are the sections? If it's got its sections, what are the sections about it like? All right, what is that that thing that they're producing has that's a prerequisite of what other things? And then setting some time frame expectations. Well, I think we ought to target having this done by this date. And personally, just as I'm a generally intuitively organized person, so I'll up immediately to laying out a spreadsheet for this, where we listed, here's the different things, with our first book, here's the different kingdoms, here's the different patrons. All right, and then we had a column. This is the person who's going to be writing it. And then we had a separate column for proofreading, so that each of everybody in the project was proofreading everybody else's stuff, so that we had multiple proofreaders. And what's been done, mark, have a that way who was keeping track of gathering the whole thing together could look at this and get a visual representation of, color coded and check marked. Here's what's done. Here's what still needs to be worked on. And so that if one of my other team members, which in my case is family members, so it requires a certain amount of tact, was perhaps lagging behind on something, then I could have that delicate conversation of, so how's that going? And is there anything that you're hung up on that I can help with? And frankly, if I try to envision the notion of having gone through that without my planning spreadsheet, I just can't even conceive of it. You know, how things would have stayed on task and how we would have gotten done anywhere near our target time, because in our case we wanted to have it done by a certain point so that it could be out before a certain convention. And I've known people who have done this kind of thing and just kind of went into it as, I'm just going to write a thing, and then it just kind of falls apart if you don't set those structures to it. To my experience, the odds of it coming to fruition and coming together cleanly are just not great. So that's the approach that we took with it. Since we ended with Chris last on our previous topic, we'll jump to him. How's your what's your planning and management process look like?
All right. Well, we used to use spreadsheets at first, but we have very recently, within the last month or so, we've switched to an online project management service, which, you know, some of us fought because we're like, oh, we can do this in Excel, but there are certainly some advantages to it. Much like a Google Doc, everybody can see the parts, and it's just easier to graphically represent everything. And much like you're saying, the most important part is to set goals, set very reasonable goals. Don't be afraid to pad them either, because it's like, if you know, this needs to be off to the printer in 6 months, then you need to be starting it before that. You know what I mean? You want to make sure, because things happen, especially when you're dealing with freelancers. I'm sure we're all aware, life happens and things like that. You don't realize you turn an ankle, or you strain your wrist or something like that, and then you can't do something for 4 weeks. All of a sudden, you're behind. So you want to make sure you pad your deadlines enough. And you get better at that when you learn the freelancers you're working with. Some artists, they can pump out a cover in a couple of days, with enough, Jolt Cola and energy. Jolt Cola's back in the 80s. It's really energy drinks, I guess, is what it is. Red Bull these days, but I just dated myself. But anyway, enough Mentos and cola, and you can get a lot done.
Chris, I want to jump in just real quick on something there, because I think it's really, really important, and I don't want people to miss this notion. Everything takes longer than you think.
Yes.
Everything always takes longer than you think. So when you're laying out your prospect of, here's when we're going to expect things to be done, always pad those. Always, because things always come up, and
especially now.
Right. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I hate to interrupt, but I just feel like that was a really critical point that I don't want folks to miss. Always provide some buffer that is longer than you think this ought to take, because nothing ever takes the amount of time you think it will.
Yeah, and I used to think that was just a field biology thing. When I was like, oh my God, you go out into the field, traffic, equipment breaking down, weather, wind, all these things. And I'm like, if it's a 2-day or a 3-day project in the field, assume it's going to be 4 or 5 days. And then if you get it done in 2 or 3, hey, we made more money. It's like that was kind of the thing. I thought that was specific to field biology. No, it's very applicable to this too.
Every field.
Yeah, and again, when you start relying on more people, your team gets bigger, it gets harder. When it's just you and one other person, or if it's just you can set those expectations. It's all about setting goals and making sure they're achievable. They say that all the time when you're like exercise programs and whatever. If you sit there and say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in a month, you're not going to stick to it. You're not going to lose 50 pounds in a month. You have to be realistic. And if you're not realistic, and then you have to check every once in a while, you have to check on your progress and look at your milestones. So that's the whole part of project management. So it's like, if you think that the artist is going to take 6 months to do a cover, you probably want to check in with them every month and say, how are we coming? Oh, I haven't even started it yet, but don't worry, we have 5 months. Fine. But if we get to that last month and he's like, I haven't even started it yet, well, then maybe there's a problem. So, like you said, there's a, I'm stuck now. Now what do we do? Maybe we have to start looking into something, different on that. So it's vastly, it varies from people to people. Another very valuable lesson that I've learned is different folks prefer to communicate differently. And some people respond to emails written, some people phone calls, some people text. Okay. But if somebody doesn't ever have their smartphone with them, texting isn't going to help. It's like, then that's an email person, and you have to kind of adjust to that. But ask people, ask how they want to communicate. Do you want to have a weekly meeting? Most people don't want to have meetings. We don't have to have a meeting if we can get by with a quick text every once in a while. Or another thing that we do with when we put teams of writers together, we create a Discord server for them. And then the next thing you know, all 6 writers are on the Discord server, and they're all communicating and they're working things out where they don't even need to involve you most of the time. But you can always pop on there and take a look at things and be like, oh, okay, they're working on this issue that they're having. So they're taking it to the next step. So there's a lot of different tools out there. Some folks, though, don't. Discord, I don't go and check Discord. I set a Discord server up for my 6 writers, and I don't check Discord on a regular basis. So they were asking questions and like, how come Chris isn't responding? And it's like, because I'm not like tuned into Discord every day. I was like trying to I had to make myself go and look at the Discord server. But for other people, they have it on all the time, every day, and it's very intuitive to them. So you have to learn what people respond to communication wise, and then again, adapt to that and make people feel comfortable. And then you'll get more out of people that way.
Mm-hmm. All right, Trevor, tell us what your process looks like.
My process is, well, it's a hybrid of a couple of different processes, right? So I do, like I said, when I'm tracking kind of formal workloads and everything of freelancers and stuff, I work by work orders and I track by work orders and everything, and I have an Excel spreadsheet. When I'm looking at progress on projects, though, I'm working at a completely different level. I use tags on folders and on documents. And so I have a color coding scheme of, red means it's in writing, blue means I've sent that to an editor, whichever editor that might be. I just kind of passively know that on my brain because I've got that low level of workload that I'm working on that I can kind of keep all of that straight still. And then, and then I'll know that, say, green means it's done. We're finished with manuscript. It's in final form. And so then I can quickly by color look at a given issue, and I can open it up, and every article has has its own folder, right? So, and then within that I have art assets and I have old versions of iterative drafts, and I can quickly open it and say, I'm at about halfway done with this issue. That's where I'm at, and I need to talk to a couple writers if I've got a couple of guest writers on that, or I really need to get some writing done so I can get it to editing. So that's kind of how I suss through my daily evaluation of where we're at on any given project. And then one of the things that, I'm working on multiple projects at the same time, probably about a dozen at this point. And so I'm constantly reevaluating which I should pivot to be most important in terms of getting it to final publish form, right? So, I'm always working on manuscripts. I'm always working with artists across all these various projects, but certain projects go to the forefront or get pulled from the forefront of going to Kickstarter or something like this, because I know this project, sometimes a project gets done faster than I expect it to. That happens. That's rare. But or sometimes I'll find a magic combination of articles to go into an issue that originally weren't there when I started envisioning what that issue was going to look like, and it'll just kind of fall together. Again, that's rare. And so it's very ad hoc. I'd love to know if you guys, if you can tell us, Chris, what your project management software is. Is that something only you use, or is it something you and Joe use, or is that Joseph use, or is it something that all the freelancers can see as well?
No, not all the freelancers yet. Eventually we would like to get to that point, but like I said, it is an online service and it does cost per user. So right now we've got it just to the core Goodman Games group. The folks that really need to be, Michael, the art director, myself, Joe, And I think there's a couple of other people involved as well, but we don't even have the editors folded in yet. Eventually we will be folding more people in once we get, like I said, we literally just started using this about 2 months ago, a month or two ago. So we're still learning it, and there is quite a big of a learning curve in trying to figure it out. There's been several times where we've set a whole project up and we're like, no, I don't like that. And it's like, erase and start all over again, because we're trying to learn, how we want to do things and what the best way to display the information is. And one of the best ways we found is using Gantt charts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what a Gantt chart is. So basically, for folks watching who don't know, it's basically a calendar, and it shows a bar of like how everybody's working on their pieces. So if the writer has 2 months to work on it, and then after the writer's done, we have 2 months for layout and art. You can see just by quick looking, here's where this project is, and here's where the next project is, and here's where the next project is. And it's also very useful to see that we're not sending 7 things to the layout guy, because it's one guy, in 1 week. It's like we can set that up. We're like, well, maybe we shouldn't send this here because he's already working on this other deadline and he's going to need extra time for that. So then you need to, again, that's where the padding comes in that we were talking about. Like, maybe I need to send it to him earlier, or he needs to go to him later. Well, maybe later is not an option if you didn't pad it enough as far as your timeline. So then you might be stuck with, well, this has to get done before this one gets done. And when you can see that visually, that's great. And that's the place that Joe wants us to all get to, where we can see everything visually, and you can just open something up and look at something. And you can't do this with Excel. Well, you probably could with Excel, but you to click on something, look at something. Okay, I see exactly what everybody's working on and what stages it's in and where we're at, and if it's on track, not on track, etc. So
yeah, and so for me, color coding is really useful when I
Yes.
organized my doctorate work, and I was working on sequencing molecules. I was doing tons of DNA across 60 or 70 species for multiple fragments of DNA. I could color code it as to, this has been extracted, this has been PCR, this has been sent for sequencing, this has got raw sequence, this has got cleaned up sequence. And I could communicate on a single screen with a committee or myself or my advisor or whatever. This is where I'm at on this project. That sounds very similar, but it's also got the calendar aspect to it to kind of project, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
It's that age-old, a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing. It's like, don't tell me in an email, let me look at it. And it's like, okay, that's fine, and you can do all that. And eventually we're going to get better at it, because we're still in the learning curve at this point. We're still trying to figure it out, but the work doesn't stop while we're trying to figure it out. It's like everything keeps piling up, and it's like, I really need to spend some time and work on this. So I think we're going to be at a good place 6 months from now, but we do have to get to that point. So
yeah. So visual systems, and like I said, for me, color is important.
Yeah, color is incorporated with this software. You can make it very much a big part of that.
So Levi, tell us how you manage your situation.
You guys are talking about gene sequencing and Gantt.
I want to hear more about the gene sequencing, actually.
No, man, I'm over here like some sort of wayward chain smoking carny. It would be if you guys had seen some of my early attempts at managing some of this stuff. It was pretty embarrassing, but over time, finally, over time, I've come to a pretty good system, at least for myself and a very small team. Because really, when you come down to it, it's just myself, Tracy Steele, our layout design guru, and then a handful of artists, editor. Those are the core people that are involved in making a product. So a couple things, I just work really, really closely with these folks, where I find that that very clear and direct communication is extremely important. And within that, kind of a clear communication of what is expected. This is my job, this is your job. Everybody there's a lot of moving parts. This is what you're in charge of, this is what I'm in charge of. And then again, like we talked before about that project manager piece coming in and making sure that all the gears are turning with, nothing gumming up the works. I'm a big believer in two-way street communication, where I'm going to tell you, this is where I'm coming from, but at the same time, I don't want you to hold anything back. I want you to tell me what your concerns are. I want to hear what you have to say. If you think that this doesn't work, then tell me why. And I strive to kind of to really be open to that kind of communication. I think it's very, very important, because you don't want to have one member of your team, feeling either dejected or left out or feeling like they're not heard. That can be very, demoralizing, and that's no good for everybody. And then, probably the last piece of that is ownership of what you're doing, and your mistakes and your triumphs over excuses. If you're responsible for a piece, or you're responsible for a piece maybe not working out so well, have ownership of it. It doesn't mean that everybody else is going to come down on you. It means that hey, let's all work together. Let's put our heads together and figure out the best way to improve this. So again, communication, that's the number one thing for me, as far as the back and forth with my team. On the as far as the sort of things that we use, the tools we use, it's pretty simple, man. It's Google Docs, it's spreadsheets. We were using the Trello app for a while and had everybody on that, and that worked for a couple projects. But I found, as even though everybody got a little bit better at using it, it kind of dropped off there towards the end, and it was just I was kind of had to go in behind everybody, and I already had their piece. I've had it for a week, but they hadn't gone on the Trello, so I just abandoned that, and the spreadsheets just worked out. But again, you have to understand, when it comes to an operation like a Goodman or any of these larger third party publishers, my kind of where I'm at, that's small potatoes. I'm putting out 5 or 6 products a year, and that's small potatoes compared to somebody who has a larger team, and they're just, they're having hey, we've got a schedule, we have to crank this stuff out. We got to make sure that it's all quality, so it's easier for me to manage with those lesser tools than it would be, for a larger company.
All right. So, I want to take a look just real briefly at the notion of how we how we've come to pin down roles and expectations. We've talked already a bit about what our how we've accomplished that so far. Like I said, in my case, or in our case, it was largely a matter of it seemed different roles seemed like it just felt intuitive, like a good fit. I will say that there was one point where there was a particular part of the process where we started into it, and my wife was working on it, and I kind of felt like, I think maybe I can get this taken care of. And I jumped in and started putting some time in on that. And it kind of, it came across to her like, look, I don't like the quality or the timing of what you're doing. So communication on this is really key. Just make sure that you're clear with each other, or with everybody in your group, of what everybody's expectations are. That'd be the only thing that I would add to what I've already put forth. Trevor?
I totally agree. So, before we got into doing zines as a group, Brian Gilkison, John Olszewski, and myself sat down and had several long conversations about, nice ones in the afternoon on a summer day on a porch about, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to achieve it, and what was important for each of us to achieve, right? And that was different for each of us as we were working on those initial issues of Smoking Worm. And then we reevaluated that about 2 or 3 issues in. So about 6 to 8 months ago, we sat down and said, okay, so here's how the world's changed. This is where we're at in terms of wanting to get things done. and does it, what are people's levels of commitment to projects and stuff, and how can we deal with adjustments, right? I mean, this went from being a part-time thing for me to being largely my full-time thing, as I take care of other responsibilities that I have with family and stuff. And so that's a different viewpoint than what it was at the beginning, where it was just like, yeah, this is something to fill my hours in the evening and give me some free, give me something to do. But I'm a firm believer of open communication, which is exactly what Ed, you and Levi have said, and I believe that's exactly what Chris is saying too, right? I mean, I think all these project management tools are designed to hopefully give you the level of transparency and open communication you need to get things done. Yeah. So whenever I hit one of those roadblocks of, someone doesn't feel like, they're being appreciated as a team member, or, one of us, often myself, falls flat on our face and has to pick things up and say, okay, this is where I screwed up. And I believe with you, I agree with you 100%, Levi, on ownership, right? It's a humbling experience to have to say, I'm the reason this is a problem, or I'm the reason this failed. But it's an important thing to deal with. And I think it's good to be humble. It helps a lot. It's part of genuineness, right? So yeah, I totally agree with you, Ed. Open communication, I think, is important, and I think it's also important to turn around and look at expectations over time with your team, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And if they're not, if things have changed, to be able to pivot and adapt around that.
Mm.
So, how about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think this really dovetails nicely with the communication side of it. And let's face it, communications, it's hard, especially face to face is hard. Sometimes it's hard. You have to have what I used to call uncomfortable conversations with people when they're behind on a project or something like that. But if you don't have them, the problem's not getting solved. And if anything, it's getting worse. And I always try to strive with my freelancers, especially the ones I've not worked with, is stay up with communication. If you're not going to make your deadline, don't tell me the day of the deadline. Tell me 2 weeks before. If it looks like you're not going to, hopefully you've got your act together where you're going to know 2 weeks before you're not going to hit your deadline, because then there's still time to do something about it. And it's not a bad thing. And it's like, I'm not going to bite your head off. It's like, now that I know, now I can now reach out to the other members of the team and we can figure out how we're going to solve the problem. But if you don't ever bring the problem up, then we certainly do anything about it. I think as far as negotiating those expectations, I think one of the really big things that we deal with is word counts. That's probably the biggest thing with a freelancer, and is, there are some projects where word count is, it has to be 10,000 words or less. And, our rule of thumb is plus or minus 10%. So if you're assigned 10,000 words, it should be between 9 and 11. It shouldn't be 15, and good God, it better not be 20. But there's some projects where word count's not as much of an issue. But you need to let people know that, but then you also need to let people know you're only getting paid for 20,000 words. You feel free to send in 30, but you're only getting paid for 20. Because we don't have an unlimited budget to pay for the writing part of it. So that's really important. So really, it does come back to communication and learning how to communicate with people. And I think if anybody takes any kind of leadership training or course or anything like that, it's all about communication. It's all about talking to people. If it was easy to communicate with people, everybody would do it, and there would never be misunderstandings, and probably half the wars in our history of humans would never have happened. So really, that's probably the most important part. And I don't think we'll ever, as a species, ever figure out the best way to communicate. But we have to try, and it is easier when you've been working with people for a long amount of time and you know how to communicate with them. It is certainly easier, and there's a comfort zone there. But that is probably the key to that.
Yeah. Levi, how about you?
Sorry, my dog was barking.
No, absolutely.
Again, I think leadership and communication is the key. You know, and here's another thing with that communication piece that I don't think we've covered. You know, for at least for me, I think having a style guide sometimes, or templates for the way that you like your stuff to look, not so much the content, but the way it kind of looks. You know, here's the key points we want to hit. You know, especially when you're working within, you know, the smaller modules or products. I think that helps a lot. But regardless of all that, you know, somebody has to be steering the ship very clearly. You have to have somebody at the top who is clearly, you know, in a leadership role and can make all the pieces come together. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, is the project management, you know. But having that person, or, you know, sometimes multiple folks, depending on how big your project is. I mean, I'm certainly not to that size of project yet, but they're out there, you know. All that stuff helps.
Yeah. You know, so as an aside, to kind of wrap up this section on communication, I was I had the fortune to be the director of a program, of a university program, for almost a decade, and we would query the employers who hired the students leaving our program. You know, over 8-10 years we did that, and every year they came back and they said, soft skills. The number one thing we want is soft skills. Well, we don't produce soft skills, right? We produce hard skills. We're a science program. But, you know, we would beef up the soft skills, and we would give that more and more to students. We'd create soft skill scenarios and everything, and it never changed. So I know that we were definitely 300 to 500% more soft skills by the end of that decade than we were at the beginning. And the number one thing that employers were requesting, and, you know, were soft skills and project management, the ability to communicate and work in teams. And it's the number one skill set. So thank you. We've just proven exactly what all the employers told me over a decade. Sorry, total aside, but I mean, it's true, right? I mean, it's amazing how important that skill set is. Yeah.
I became a scientist, so I didn't have to stand up in front of people and talk to them. And what did I end up doing when I was a scientist? I stood up in front of large groups of people and talked to them. And it was and it's like, never learned any of that in school. I mean, I did presentations in front of my class and stuff like that, but never had any kind of other formal training with doing that. And that was a huge part of the job. And it was just like, figure it out and get over it.
We should sit down and have a drink sometime and chat, Chris, because I completely agree. I went through my PhD program in biology, and it was like no soft skills. I mean, you stood up in front of a class, but that was it.
Yeah.
And 90% of my job once I left was what we've been talking about, right?
Exactly.
And it was all learned on the fly.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah. So what else did we have in mind for this episode, Ed? We're getting kind of long in the tooth, so I think we're wrapping it. We're getting near the end, though.
Yeah. So the last thing we wanted to touch on was the issue of proofreading and editing, as you kind of bring those into one topic area. And you know, I think that it goes without saying, and we can all probably relate to this. It doesn't matter how many times you go over something. There's always going to be, you know, I've found technical mistakes, typos in the hard copy of the DCC rulebook that I've got. You know, no matter how many times you go over something, you're always going to miss something, especially if it's a sizable body of work. But you want to minimize that. And so there's different types of proofing and editing. You've got your you might call it developmental editing. This is your most basic editing for the mechanical portion of your content. You've got your proofreading in the sense of, you know, reading through and just looking for the obvious things, typos. You know, you said this, you repeated this phrase or whatever. Does it flow well? Does it read well? If I'm not the person who wrote it, can I understand what it's supposed to be conveying? And once you go into the layout process, I know I've run into cases where I accidentally copy the same paragraph into that process twice, and or leave one out. And so you need to go through and review that. Trevor mentioned something in a previous episode that I thought was a really great idea that I know I'm going to start using in the future is do some of your proofreading, or at one stage of your proofreading, do an entire read out loud. And that can help you find a lot of things that you're not going to find if all you're doing is reading it visually. Because when we're reading when we're just reading something silently, we fill in stuff in our head based on the expectation of how we think the sentence is what it's going to say, and maybe those words aren't actually there. I had already mentioned with our approach, part of our project planning spreadsheet is we had columns for proofreading. Okay, every person on our team is going to proofread every piece, at least from the first pass through, and then once I had the manuscript put together, then I would have my wife go through. I would read through it, of course, word for word, have her read through the entire thing. So let's go to the group then and see what is the proofing and editing process look like for y'all, and how do we find problems and fix problems. Let's start with Chris.
So yeah, first of all, this is probably one of the most important steps and in the whole process, proofing and editing. We kind of have a philosophy when it comes to editing, and this might be pulling back the curtain a little too much, but there's a couple of things that you can do here. Do you want to get every comma right, or do you want to get every rules mechanic right? In our opinion, you want every rules mechanic right. I mean, now, you do want the sentences to be complete and grammatically correct. But if there's a comma that's not in the right place, most people are not going to catch that. If you get the, attack bonus on a manticore wrong or something, you're going to get so many people are going to catch up on that, and they're going to give you, that feedback that you don't want. So that's a decision. That's a decision of what's our priority here. When we were looking for editors, we wanted editors that were proficient in the game systems, really proficient in the game systems that they were editing, and more so, we wanted them to be game masters. And we had several very high qualified editors, but they never were behind a screen before. And they're like, oh, I watched Critical Role all the time, or I read all the books. But we wanted ones that actually played the game, because we felt that was an important thing to kind of complete the picture. So that's one thing that we feel very important. I'm going to add one more thing on that I think it kind of like the reading out aloud, which is a great thing, but playtesting. Playtesting, you find so many problems with playtesting. Yep. Stuff like, it's like, oh, they cast fireball in this room. The bad guy casts fireball in this room. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. That would spill out into the next room, and that would then take out the guard post and stuff that you don't realize when you write those words. But then when you're actually at the game table playing it, it really brings it. It's like the reading out loud. You all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, there needs to be another door here. Or wait a minute, my read aloud text says the door is in the north wall, but my map shows clearly the door is in the south wall. That's a problem, and you need.
Or if I give the wizard this spell, it's going to break my entire module. So
yeah, and there's that part too as well. Yes. So I think that playtesting, and I, quite frankly, I don't think enough companies do enough playtesting. You can almost never playtest enough. Yeah, at some point you have to not, and it's so hard to build that in. I mean, right now I'm playtesting a product that's probably not going to come out until 2024, and it's like, because I know that we need to get a jump on things and stuff like that. So it's a hard thing to kind of think about, and that project's not even on a schedule yet, but we're pretty sure we're going to do it. So hopefully, but it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial to actually run, especially if you've got some difficult encounters, or the monster book that we did. We had a couple of monsters where we're like, we're not sure how this trait is going to work, or this attack is going to work. We need to see it in action. And it wasn't like we put it in a module. We literally just ran a combat with it, and then, oh yeah, that doesn't work. for X, Y, and Z, so it needs to be addressed. So I would say playtesting has to be an important part of that process, and can be happening during the layout stage, and the proofing stage. And then I'm just going to agree with you. The more eyes you can get on it, the better. And sometimes even getting eyes on it of people who are not familiar with the game, if that's possible. If you have a spouse who doesn't play the game and just say, hey, does this make any kind of sense to you? Sometimes they'll be like, this makes no sense, even though you think it makes sense from a game standpoint. So that's invaluable too. The fact of the matter is, a lot of times when you're getting to the end of that project, when you've got that deadline coming in, it needs to go to Kickstarter, or needs to go to the printer, you don't get that option where you get enough proofreading or play testing, and that's a problem. But so again, padding is important on the scheduling, but at the end of the day, at some point it needs to go to the printer.
Mm-hmm. Trevor?
So I definitely want to agree with Chris and you, Ed. I think playtesting is, I think that's an excellent addition to the editing repertoire, right? I think that's something that I don't appreciate a lot, or I didn't appreciate a lot, just doing kind of the fanzine magazine type of format, until we stepped into something that was more of a set piece, right? That was more of a location, and then you had to have spatial awareness and stuff that isn't necessarily always evident. And I think I agree that it's not just playing. You need to run a game before you can really appreciate some of those editing nuances, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to know where your known traps are in terms of rule mechanics and stuff. My developmental editing team is really strong, and so we spend a lot of time in developmental editing, making sure that we've sussed through things quite a bit, and oftentimes we get it to about the 80% written, what we think is 80% written, and then we hand it, we basically then pull it into our own games. And we'll, like, if we're creating a new class or a new spell or a new patron or something, right, for DCC, since I'm very DCC focused, we'll hand that to a player and say, okay, here's this. You didn't write anything on this, but I need you to run, we're gonna patronize you, right? You're gonna make you an adherent to a patron for a while, and you're gonna run with this and tell us what you think of it. And we'll get to see it in action and stuff. And so that's really helpful in terms of then going back into development and everything, because we have that luxury of kicking something down the road into a later issue if we need to, because it's not a product. It is a product, but you know what I mean? I can move an article around and move things up to fill that space if I had an idea of where I was going to put it. Copy editing and content editing, I think, are really helpful. Content editing is looking at things in terms of variable and diverse viewpoints and stuff, and making sure that we're not accidentally stepping on toes that frankly I don't want to step on. And making sure that it's that what we're producing is as appealing to many people as we can, and letting folks know if we don't think it's going to be appealing to a certain subgroup, right? And so recently, actually, with issue 4 Smoking Worm, we started putting content warnings in a real small, out of the way place, so that people who are keyed into those things can look for them. And then I, a couple of my editors are grammar nerds, right? I mean, they literally edit everything. They can't stop. And so we have long arguments about Oxford commas and stuff like this and everything. And that's, we when we're working on a module for the first time right now, so everybody else here has done modules and I've never have, and so we're working on a small module, and I was like, I really need this is something I've always felt is missing from a module, and we resurrected the manicule as a play aid, right, and started putting it in everywhere so that I could link multiple pages together with key outs and stuff and everything. So I think that kind of editing is important too. And then final proofreading, when everything's laid out and everything's on plan, you can look at it in a file and you've got an InDesign file in front of you, or even just a PDF, it's about to go to the printer. I always have two of us put our eyes on the product at the same time, and we talk about it and then go through and make final little itty bitty corrections, and understanding that it's never going to be perfect. So I look at issue 1, we're now 2 years in, and I'm like, the errors are everywhere, right? This is horrible. This is one of our team members. He's a fellow biologist as well. and he was trained to do editing as part of his job, and he went back and looked at his dissertation, and he was like, "This is junk," right? Like 5 years later, he's like, "I would never write this." So you're always going to find that. And so the other thing is my final piece of advice is just let loose and let a product go and let it be what it is. And don't kill yourself if you find you're missing a comma, or heaven forbid, as we discovered back with issue 1 of Smoking Worm, we accidentally left in Constitution instead of swapping it over to Fortitude. Wrong stats. I mean, how is that? But some of us are so ingrained in a game world or a milieu like D&D that you think like that. It's not even something that you would miss. So yeah, I've gone on too long. Levi, how about you?
I really think going back to that reading things aloud, that is a massive component of my proofreading process, because I can think of things that I've written out, in that high Gygaxian or that Eldritch, this or and I go back and I read it to myself, and I'm like, who is this jabroni that wrote this? Like, this is terrible. Like, I sound like an a-hole. So then you have to go back in and write it, maybe not so crazy, because as writers we get a little wordy, or we get a little lofty with some of the things that some of the prose that we write, and you got to go in there and kind of course correct yourself. But as far as like the process, like what's the breakdown? Well, I do the first pass. Like, once I have everything, it's all there, I do the first pass. I usually print things out, and I go in, instead of actually looking at it on the computer, I look at it, page by page, and I go in with the old trusty marker, and I start circling corrections. This goes back to being in the Navy when I was a yeoman in the Navy, which is like a glorified secretary. And I would go in and have to, correct these documents, just reams and reams of paper of the most boring things you've ever read. But I was always looking for the comma in the wrong spot, or, the apostrophe not used correctly. So that helped me doing that. And I also do the final pass. So first and final pass for sure. But in between that, I usually hire an editor who comes in, and they take this mess that me and my fellow collaborators have made, and they put it in, into more of a coherent form than probably better than it deserves. And then after I get that back, I read that, I do another pass, and then hopefully, if possible, I get the editor on the phone, or we have a Zoom, and we kind of go over little like highlights or problem areas that one of us has identified on the phone. And then once all that's done, I go over it one final time, boom, done. And then again, I'm a big proponent also of once you're done with it, once you've done everything that you think you can do, and you're ready to own those mistakes, you're ready to take full accountability for it all, let it go, and it is what it is.
All right, well, that brings us to a wrap on this foray into team publishing. We hope that for those of you who are looking into the or are already engaged in the third-party publishing world for Goodman Games, that this is giving you some ideas and some things to chew on. And so I want to thank again our guests, Chris and Levi, for coming to join us for this and bringing in their additional perspective to what we would have had to offer. And thank my co-host Trevor. And we'll look forward to seeing y'all in another episode, where we help provide some tips and tricks on third-party publishing. So, good night, folks.
Have a good night, everyone.
Everybody.